Welcome to another episode of CENJOWS podcast series. In this episode, the discussion will be focused around multi-domain operations architecture. We have the honor of hosting Vice Admiral Sanjay Mahindru, retired, on this day. We welcome you, sir. So, before we move on to the formal discussions, I would like to take an opportunity to introduce our chief guest. Vice Admiral Sanjay Mahindru, retired, is a distinguished flag officer of the Indian Navy with almost 4 decades of service, specializing as a submariner and operations officer. He is an alumnus of National Defence Academy, Khadakwasla, Joint Services Command and Staff College, UK, and King's College, London. He was the first commanding officer of the India's first SSBN, INS Arihan, and has commanded INS Shakti, INS Krishna, INS Rajput, and the submarine training establishment INS Satvahana. His flag appointments included Flag Officer Submarines, Flag Officer Commanding Maharashtra Naval Area, Deputy Commander-in-Chief Strategic Forces Command, and Deputy Chief of Naval Staff. A noted expert in submarine operations, underwater domain awareness, and sea-based nuclear deterrence, he now contributes to National Strategic Discourse as a member of the Council of USI of India and as an honorary distinguished fellow at the National Maritime Foundation. For his gallantry and exceptional dedication to the service, he has been awarded the Nau Sena Medal Gallantry, Ati Visisht Seva Medal, and the Param Visisht Seva Medal. Sir, it's an honor to host you today. And once again, on behalf of CENJOWS, we welcome you.
Thank you, Vinay. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you, sir. Sir, before we, I have a set of questions that always runs in my mind when multi-domain or, operations architecture comes. But before I move on to those questions, for our first-time listeners and those who are not aware exactly what MDO is, I would kindly request you to set the tone by, giving a brief introduction of MDO in your perspective.
Yeah, so thanks, Vinayak. Firstly, it's extremely important and a very that you have chosen for the discussion today, maritime multi-domain awareness. But so multi-domain awareness comes from a long perspective of, let's say, almost today, I would say about 100 years. There was a time when each service, and there were earlier only 2 services, the Army and the Air Force, Army and the Navy. The Navy fought on sea and the Army fought on land. And things were quite peaceful, I would say, till the beginning of the 20th century. But the problem started when the ranges of the weapons started increasing and the surveillance ranges started increasing. So then the weapons could be fired from land into the sea and from the sea into land to affect the battle on land. And to add to the confusion in a way, we developed the aircraft. Now, the aircraft was largely till the end of flight largely over land. So then you have the air domain to a very comfortable, cozy 2-domain situation which was existing till then. The Army the Army wanted to quite clear that the air element or the aircraft carriers, the flat as they were by the 90s, 1930s, were already being used. So you had the air element from sea being used and the aircraft from land being used at sea. Simultaneously, the ranges of the sensors, the radar ranges were improving as Second World War came to an end. The weapon missiles now were of a range. You are not only using balls, you are not using guns, using missiles, which could, go well beyond the range of the domain on. So you had this kind of a combination of the ecosystem and the effect that you could have. And that, of course, by the end of Second World War and by the beginning of the Cold War, it became evident that all these capabilities have to work the optimal result, the efficient result. And therefore, I would say Army and the Navy used to work a lot together in any case as far as amphibious operations went. But then the Air Force started being integrated into these kind of operations. And then by the 50s or 60s, surveillance increased, and then we went into space as well. So that means your surveillance went into space very quickly. By the 70s, your ability to set capabilities. So the space also became an important domain. Now all these operating separately was not a way of working. So there was a need, and in most of these things, like we have seen, they were led by instances. In the US, there were instances where US, by the way, by the end of the Second World War, created unified combat commands. They did not go joint completely. I hope we understand what is jointness and what is integration. I mean, jointness means that these three forces work together, at least two of them work together to achieve ultimate level of jointness. That means you are now capabilities as one. Three services come. But the Americans, after the World War, went into something new combat command, and they were together under one boss. That's all. They never went into integration in a very big manner. So, but certain incidents, like I was mentioning earlier, in the early 80s, led to an outcry where there was a need for structural requirements. In Granada, there was a snafu where a lot of people died. There were other two or three incidents in the early 80s, 1980s, where the Goldwater Nicholas Act was brought in by integrate your capabilities, very seamlessly, so that the application of force by Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines becomes optimal, and we do not have instances like that again. Now, a lot of the countries picked up this unified combat command and this jointness philosophy from the Americans. And then the Britishers and the NATO, of course, applied it, and Russians and the Chinese, and we are also on the verge. We've been applying it, of course. We always applied it, and Sindoor was a great issue of jointness has many components. You have organizational jointness, then you have to have training jointness, then you have doctrinal jointness and procurement jointness. So jointness can operations, that means in the application of force, also in my training, so it force of that. Now, as I explained, how the areas have overlapped, responsibilities have been could be taken over from sea and by land. It was very natural, therefore, that the domains which were the land domain, air domain, and the sea domain get like space, because we had better technology and because the data exchange was taking place. Means cyber attacks became another area where the domain expanded. And lastly, the perception management, because through social media and the swiftness of information being much greater, largely at the turn of this century onwards, perception management became a very important part of this entire domain. So it became which domain of it. So domain means if I want to achieve something, then I have to use all these seven to achieve optimal results. And that is what is multi-domain operations. So all these domains are being used effectively to achieve an aim. So that, to my mind, is a good opening understanding to someone who is relatively new to this area. And we can now get on to the MDO.
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, for a first timer who is listening, I don't think there could have been any better explanation as to what actually MDO, means. You have very beautifully brought out like how increased ranges, have evolved the domains, and all the 7 domains that you have mentioned. Yes, there is absolutely a need to synthesize all the domains in order to achieve the true, multi-domain operations. And you also brought out the difference between jointness and integration that many of the, listeners might not be aware about. So thank you for setting the tone. And sir, while you mentioned regarding, different assets, like when there are high intensity operations, we receive data from multiple assets, be it from land based assets, be it marine based assets, be it space based assets like satellites, be it cyber data centers. So do you think there is this possibility that these data might reach that level where there we reach a data saturation point? If we do so, then how do you think as a commander they'll be able to effectively calculate and navigate through this saturation in order to maintain that tactical operability? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so like to make Vinayak that the sea is a very huge space. I mean, generally people don't appreciate how huge the sea is, and relatively the density of targets is very less. So it's a very sparse area. So the amount of data that is being transferred, you're right. The data is coming from all sources, from satellites, from terrestrial, from command centers, from other ships to one ship to another, from one ship to the submarine, from the satellite to the submarine. There are multiple channels of data transfer happening. But the fact is that, and also the fact remains that bandwidth is a major problem. We always want to push out more and more data to the units at sea. But I think we are at a stage where we understand this problem very well. We manage the data extremely well, uh, in the sense that the data is already thinned to a large extent. We do a lot of data thinning so that just the basic amount of minimal information which is essential for the task is passed on to the ship. That is one part of it. We also have immense peak times. We will need to use one of this that amount of data, then channel this information to my forces at sea. The next thing that we do is something called edge computing. I don't need to carry all my data on these channels from land to sea or from satellite to sea. A large amount of data churning and data analysis that is done is based on historical data. That means I have to know what is the acoustic data or the atmospheric data in that area for the last 15 years. And based on that, then I can predict that if I'm going to transmit, what will be the range that I will get on my radar, or if I was to fire a weapon, then what would be the optimal path, or the stuff like that. So when I'm doing edge computing, I then give my ship a lot of data in itself. So the ship then has, that means the band. Secondly, the ship is immune to degradation. That means if someone degrades that channel also, then the ship is quite self-contained. Ship is able to manage. I think we are quite conscious of the fact that it needs to be managed. We should be able to able to send minimum amount of data, or we should be required to send the minimum amount of data for the ship to remain optimal. And today the standoff ranges are such that you're not exchanging at 10, 15, 20, 30 miles. The ranges are much more. So you have that time, you have that ability, and through better infrastructure. So we are managing it quite well. I don't think there is a problem of data saturation in that
Thank you,
sense.
sir. Thank you for bringing that we don't have to worry about this data saturation, and for assuring that we are perfectly capable of maintaining, and even if we reach such a state. Sir, when we talk about theater commands or jointness, there are many bottlenecks that the scholars out there speak about. And two such bottlenecks that I can think of is, one is the technical interoperability dilemma, where data might not get aligned when received from different sources. And there is also this serving cultures, like if a soldier is trained in the armed, like Army, Navy, and Air Force, their culture, like serving culture, might be different. So, which one of these do you think is bigger of a problem, if so? And how do you think one can navigate, if through these problems, if they exist?
Yeah, so another excellent question, Vinayak. So yes, you see, I won't cover the issue of culture much, because today at the appropriate level, let's say at least, I mean, we do our NDA training together, then we come into staff course, so we have a good appreciation of the importance of different aspects to a different service. So we understand that. And anyway, the fighting at sea or on land and itself. So we are not, in a way, trying to combat an Air Force airman with a naval system. We are not trying to do that. So that I'd like to put out there earlier. The point that you brought out, that you have a network of the army coming in and into a common picture, what is also being fed in the naval network and the air network. So it can become a problem, and very rightly so. But the issues are like, I would just bring out two or three issues which come to the top of my mind. One is the refresh rates. You see, what happens is that because these three battles, at least if I can today to say the three domains, main, the operational domains, not that cyber and electronic warfare are not important, but the fact the main domains today operate at different speeds. The air component moves at a much higher speed over much lower ranges effectively. Okay. The land components moves at again relatively slower speeds, and over very small distances comparatively. The entire battle takes place in a very localized kind of manner. The naval battle, on the other hand, takes place over a very large canvas, but by and what is done by the land forces. So what happens are then uh, components. I mean, so if I'm to reflect aircraft moving, then I have to cater for 2.5 Mach. But if I apply the same thing to a ship which is moving at 15 to 16 Mach, these kind of mismatches happen. Okay, so we beware of that. These are the kind of problems that you may face. Now, what also happens is that the icons and the graphic interface, user interface that we use among the three services, because of the nature of what we are doing, are different. There is also a need, and we are aware of this and working very systematically towards it, to work out a common, icon GUI kind of format. That also eases the problem, so that I'm familiar with what the air component wants to show when he's displaying something, and the picture is coming into a common picture, then I'm aware that this is what he means. I don't have to be surprised. Similarly, the land component, I should be aware of what he wants to indicate when he's putting this icon onto the GUI. That is important. Third thing is, our now most of us in our data links are using, what you are aware, are software defined radios. So software defined radios are critical for bandwidth management. So when you do these kind of things, your waveforms are to match. That means the waveforms can be matched between the three services, and then I can pass data from one to the other. using the same radio sets or different radio sets, but using the same data channel. Okay, so that is very important. So these are the kind of congruencies that we need to get. Them working towards them, there are certain issues, certain limitations in each of these issues that are brought out. And I think we can achieve these quite well. So putting data on a single integrated picture is in our region. I think we've achieved quite a lot of integration in that manner.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for bringing out the improvements and progress that have happened in the data integration. And yes, sir, you have very beautifully brought out the fact that different domains will have different demands, and how they project their demands, and how effective the other person who is working the other domain is able to meet to that demands becomes a very crucial factor. So thank you for your answer, sir. When we talk about maritime, and that too with with respect to Indian context, one thing that comes to our mind is the Indian Ocean region. And we are well aware of the fact that that region is now increasingly filled with gray zone tactics, shadow fleets, and what one might call as asymmetric warfare threats. So how do you think that our Navy, the Indian Navy, is prepared to effectively navigate through these difficulties, while also simultaneously maintaining the fact that it will not rise into any escalations when not necessary?
Yeah, Vinayak, thanks. So, like I mentioned earlier, that Indian Ocean is a huge ocean. I mean, just to put it in area terms, it is about 70,000 million square kilometers. When that is the kind of ocean I'm looking, and I'm just talking about from, let's say, the Suez to Malacca. I mean, that's what it is. And the essence of any naval maritime awareness, another word for situational awareness at sea. Our situational awareness at sea, especially south of the equator in the Indian Ocean, try to maintain as much as we can in the Arabian Sea, in the Bay of Bengal, and till south of Sri Lanka. But beyond that, in the island areas like the Seychelles and the Mauritius, and the so there is covered. Okay, so I just want to give a picture on that. Now, gray zone operations certainly is a problem because there is a large in the capabilities of navies that are operating here. Gray zone operation happens when there is an asymmetry in capability. That means one is a very strong navy, so you have the stronger navies, you have the US Navy, relatively stronger navy, lesser strong navy. So you have navies which are strong in their own areas, like the PLA Navy is strong in its own area, but when it comes into the Indian Ocean, then it does not have the capability to uh, project the same strength here, because largely because it doesn't have that many bays to graze. They and the traditional war. So what when we means that I want to deter or I want to disturb doing something, but not taking it up to the level of combat. I want to keep it below the level of combat. So the instances or the means by which you can carry out gray zone operations aren't that many. And as a matter of fact, they're easily tabulatable. And these are tabulated and exercised in number of exercises that we have. And so the commanding officers are quite clear on what actions do they have to take in case they encounter. So they have the counters to it. They have the capabilities to engage it either as a single ship or as a part. So they're very well equipped to do it. Now, whether it is escalatory or non-escalatory is the question. So somebody is doing something to me. Let's say he's impeding my path by putting in fishing boats. I want to go somewhere, and he then, the fishing boats, 30 fishing boats start coming. Now, whether I make it escalatory or escalatory is depending on what instructions I have got. Okay, what is the rules of engagement, or what are the actions below combat which I want to take? That the commanding officer has to decide, and he will be, based on what instructions he's got, he will then take those actions. Whether he wants to keep it escalatory, he can turn around. That means he will diverge from that course and, okay, say never mind if it is supposed to be non-escalatory. But if it is going to be escalatory, then he can go in harm's way as well, or he can fire a warning shot now, or he can do many other things which will in a way coerce these people who are stopping his path. So yes, gray zone operations is a very popular way of operating here for the reasons that I told you. But again, we have a robust mechanism for managing this, and we keep learning every day. The number of instances keep increasing, which are passed on between the two fleets and the flotillas of the Navy, and they are exchanged quite frequently. So we have a good system going where we are able to counter this gray zone asymmetric threat.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing out the complexities that are involved in deciding whether any action is escalatory or not. And also you have rightfully brought out the importance of exercises, holding exercises where best of practices can be changed between two navies and even the two domains. Sir, now we know that this digital data can be called as the new fuel. But when we are going on depending so much on these digitized data, there is always this apprehension that the sources of these data, the sources through which we collect these data, can be potentially jammed or spoofed. They're very vulnerable to these kind of cyber attacks. So when these things happen during an operation, so how does the commander effectively pull off what was the what he has intended for?
Yeah, so again, Vinayak, I must go into the background of how naval communications work, or at least naval data networks work. Now, firstly, communications to ships and submarines at sea is always multispectral. That means we don't use one channel for communicating or data transfer. So you will have the super high frequency for satellite, you will have the VHF for line of sight, you will have the HF, which is a good channel for worldwide communication, and you will have VLF as well. So we are passing this on all these channels, kind of might not be absolutely simultaneously, but near simultaneously. So data is going as applicable. I mean, VHF cannot carry so much of data in that sense. So it is happening over all these. Firstly, is, like I said, is multispectral. Then you got to understand that the means of communication is largely broadcast. That means the shore station or the satellite only broadcasts, and the ship receives. There are very few instances where the ship or the submarine will communicate, will try to because as soon as you communicate, you are prone for localization. Your position can be detected and triangulated. So it is you have a very strict emission control policy. So ships will not transmit on especially the HF or the satellite communications also is super high frequency, because it is prone to triangulation and detection. So you will not do that. So basically the ship is receiving data. So when I'm receiving data, it is very difficult for someone to jam. Why? Because jamming is easy when you are very close to me. So if I have a receiver and I have someone jamming in my local region, let's say 5, 10, or even 12 miles, he can create a lot of electronic noise and jam me from my receiver from getting it. But if he does not know where I am, and if he comes within 10 or 12 miles of me, then I certainly have, I mean, and things are already south and war has been declared or combat situation is there, then I am in full liberty to possibly engage him depending on the rules of engagement. So I mean, a standoff jamming is very difficult at sea. It is an extremely difficult task to do. You can jam the transmitter. That means where my shore station is transmitting or my satellite base unit is there, that area you can jam, yes. But that is on my land, and that is already designated as a vital point or a vital area for me. So I defend it very, very closely. So in that sense, all these threats as far as communications go to the electronic spectrum jamming, etc., is extremely difficult, possible, but difficult, like I said, at sea. And like the issues like multispectral broadcast transmission aids in this inability for anybody to jam you at the this thing. Of course, also all these channels that we say are very well encrypted. That means even if I don't want to jam, I want to just pick up and then decode. All these channels are encrypted, and we use very high level of encryption. So that is also another safety which is there. One, you cannot jam. Secondly, you are encrypted, and that gives a phenomenal amount of security to communications at sea.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for explaining the technical details that are involved in this. And yes, sir, as you rightfully said, the security is assured when we use high encryptions. And this distributed spectrum delivery is also one thing that gives us the possibility that whatever data is being broadcasted will not be vulnerable to jamming. And I hope with the advancements in quantum encryption and all, the security will go step further. Sir, now we are well aware of the fact that apart from the crewed assets, there is an increasing amount of deployment of uncrewed assets, whether it's in the aerial domain, surface domain, or even the underwater domains. So my question is, like, do you think of these uncrewed assets as just some extended sensors to the already present crewed assets? Or do you think they have this capability to fundamentally alter the warfare tactics, or they might have the capacity to reduce this sensor to shooter gap that many say exists?
Yeah, so another very relevant question, I'd say. Uh, the I mean, I don't think the question is up for discussion anymore whether they are simple extensions of what we already have. I think, especially in the unmanned aerial vehicles, they've made a mark for themselves world over. And we've seen it in Ukraine, we've seen it in Sindoor, we've seen it in Epic Fury, that the intensity and the ability of an adversary to get through the defenses of a extremely competent and a very advanced adversary, defenses of an adversary who's very advanced, through swarming, through employing huge numbers of these vehicles, and overwhelming the capability, because you're shooting down a 10-20,000 dollar drone with a few $1 million worth of a interceptor missile. So that, bringing that incongruity there also uh, is one aspect. Especially in surveillance, the drones have for a very long time, especially the aerial drones, over land and over sea, have been extremely effective. They've been extremely effective in data collection. Both the hail, the mail versions have been extremely effective in that. So in that sense, they have had a, a substantial impact on the nature of warfare. On the unmanned surface vessels, that means now I'm talking largely about the sea, when you have the boats which are unmanned and which can create, you know, disturbance to shipping or enter harbors and destroy ships in jetties and ports. We've seen the devastating effect of that in the Ukraine war, in the ports of Russia, Odessa, and other ports, where the Ukrainians have used this capability very effectively to carry out some very substantial damage. But it's a localized kind of a thing, which can now, having seen Hormuz, be very effective when you come to choke point disruption or choke point defense. The unmanned surface vessel will then become very effective if I'm able to then control unmanned surface vessel through satellite communication 1,000 miles away and engage something like a choke point like Hormuz or like the Straits of Malacca or wherever I may want to do. So then that becomes another threat. But to my mind, I think the last category which you mentioned is the unmanned underwater vessels. That is because anything underwater is immensely more complicated than what we do on land or in the air. Simply because, firstly, the nature of operating in a denser environment is creates a lot of mechanical pressures which need to be gauged with, and secondly is the problem of communication. Now, both on in air and on surface, your communications are always available. You may have to, use one channel or the other, one layer or the other. You may have to encrypt it, whatever, but you will have some manner of communication available. On the other hand, when you go underwater, your communications becomes your biggest challenge. So although I may be able to control something, I cannot control it, on the spot, and therefore we are the American orca or the Australian white shark or the Chinese, I think they call it the haimu, whichever people are doing, and we are also making our own UUVs. They are all at the stage of prototype and payload validation. Once that happens, and once we are able to crack the problem of underwater communications over long ranges, I think then we will enter into a totally different domain of naval warfare, because then I can have, you know, people, or assets of an enemy coast almost for very prolonged durations, which can pop up to the surface, launch missiles. I can pop up or remain underwater and launch torpedoes, and I can do a lot of disruption. So I think that is going to have an immense impact when it happens. I think it is not imminent, but it will take time to happen. But generally, when there is a demand, technology has a tendency of catching up, and so technology will catch up. But I think that will have a phenomenal impact on how the unmanned vessels or vehicles affect warfare, especially at sea. That will be extremely interesting to see how that happens.
Definitely, sir. Definitely, I totally agree with you. Once we are able to achieve this long-range communication underwater, then I think there will be a phenomenal improvement in underwater warfare capabilities. And also, you have very rightfully brought out the roles that the unmanned assets played during various missions that you have mentioned. So I think that's all the questions that I have for today, sir. And once again, I thank you for taking time off your busy schedule and for being here with us. I'm sure the audience would be very thrilled to listen such detailed explanation of multi-domain operation architecture. And thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Vinayak, and thank you, CENJOWS, for having me over for this, I think, extremely interesting and stimulating podcast. Thank you.
And for our online audience, I hope you enjoyed today's session, and we'll meet for another such interesting session soon. Thank you.